So let's start straight away with our prayers. No need to waste time. So we're going to do refuge, bodhicitta, followed by Gandhalagema as usual. So we have finished the colors, this chapter on the colors, and we came to understand a little bit about what it means to be pervasive, not pervasive, and so forth. So we learned a little bit, didn't we? It's very good from time to time to consider that through this class, the few weeks that we had, we came to understand something new. We came to learn something new. And this is a cause for rejoicing. We have to meditate on some joy for what we have achieved. We removed one portion of confusion, of ignorance. Like we didn't know anything about colors. We didn't know anything about pervasion. But we removed just one type of ignorance that was in relation to this. And instead, we generated awareness, we generated understanding, we generated wisdom in what before we had ignorance. Isn't this a great reason to rejoice? So this is how we go along, one ignorance after the other. We substitute it with understanding, to the point that we come to know, to understand all phenomena. So this is when we reach the state of enlightenment. So we just got one step closer.
It is.
And one more point is that Geshe says, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that in Singapore, amongst all the centers that study different subjects, I think we are the only center that have studied definitions, and we're doing the debates and pervasions and all those things. So just think that from amongst all the centers in Singapore, in this center, you had this special fortune, this special opportunity. So again, this is a cause to generate joy. And when you generate joy for these special opportunities for study that you have, this actually increases your aspiration and your wish to do more and more study. So Geshe says, I see this as being an important element as well.
Yes.
Another thing to consider is that in the past, in Tibet, in order to bring the Dharma, to bring all those texts, all this knowledge, had to come from India a very long way with incredible difficulties. It was not easily accessible. It did not pervade everywhere with this ease. But here we are today, and it seems again that we have all those favorable conditions stacked on our favor, on our side. The fact that the center is there in place, and all we have to do is either log into the Zoom session or just drive into the center. And then you come there and everything is immediately accessible. So please recognize that this again is a special fortune. We're very fortunate that we have it so easy, such an easy access. So Geshe says for all of us, we have these fortunate conditions. Geshe was saying, if it was just me, yes, I can explain. I am the teacher. I can explain it. But without students, to whom would I explain this? Or if it was just you, the audience, the students, you might be very keen to listen, to hear this explanation. But if you don't have a teacher there to explain it to you, again, you wouldn't get anything. So you can see it's through interdependence, by relying upon each other, the teacher and the students, that we provide each other with this completion of favorable conditions. So again, recognize. All right, so now let's come back into our actual subject matter. As I say, we have finished the colors, and now we will move into the second subject, which is established bases. So when we looked at the colors and the shapes, in one hand, you could say that this was kind of like a limited presentation, limited subject. But when we talk about established bases, this is vast because this actually includes all existent phenomena. Everything that exists belongs into this category of established bases. Therefore, we have to look at different categories of established bases in order to understand what is included in here. It's the same way that we did with the colors and the shapes. We looked at classifications, what belongs to what, and so forth. Now, you know that we have two truths, the ultimate truth and the conventional truths. So the majority of the things that we study here belongs to conventional truths. Okay, it's in the category of conventional truths. So the colors, the shapes, and all these established bases, all of this is conventional truths. So this chapter begins by quoting from another text, and the text that it quotes from is Pramanavartika. In there we have different chapters. So it is quoting from the chapter on direct perception. So the line that we find quoted here is the line that says, since there are two types of assessed objects, there are two types of valid awareness. All right, so you see, it begins by saying, since there are two types of assessed objects. So in a sense, it gives us a reason. Because there are two types of objects, all right, therefore, we need to have two types of valid awareness. So valid awareness here is a type of awareness that correctly realizes its object, and it has to be a non-deceptive, incontrovertible type of awareness. So because we have two types of objects, we must have two types of awareness, different types of awareness that realize correctly these two types of objects. So it begins by saying, since there are two types of objects, there are two types of valid awareness, and from that point onwards, then it starts elaborating, explaining in more detail. So it says that we have two types of objects. What are these two types of objects? So in general, you could classify existent phenomena in two categories in many different ways. But the first way that we can classify them, and it's meaningful to present them in this way, is the two types of object. One is called the specifically characterized, and the other one is called the generality. So the specifically characterized object are objects that are functioning entities. They are impermanent phenomena created by causes and conditions. So all of those things are called specifically characterized phenomena. Then the other big category that we have is generalities. So generalities here, remember last week we were talking about permanent phenomena. So all the permanent phenomena belong in the generalities. Okay, so in other words, what we say is that everything that is an existent phenomenon, everything that exists, everything that is an object of knowledge has to be either a specifically characterized phenomenon or a generality. There is nothing that exists that does not belong in any of these two categories. Another way of looking at this twofold classification of objects is to say that we have hidden phenomena and obvious phenomena, all right? So again, everything that exists has to be categorized. It has to belong. It's either going to be hidden or it's going to be an obvious phenomenon. So what is that which is hidden? That which is hidden is something that we cannot perceive directly. We don't understand it directly. But if someone were to give us a reason or a logical sign, if we were to think about this logical reason, then we would understand this phenomenon. On the other hand, we have the obvious phenomena. And obvious phenomena are phenomena that we don't have to rely on logical reason. We can just directly perceive them. So there are things that we can see with our eyes. There are sounds that we can hear directly with our ears. There are smells that we can smell with our nose, tastes that we can taste directly, or things that we can touch with our hands. So we can have this direct experience of them, isn't it? So as we say, the objects of knowledge, or the existent objects, are categorized in two groups. So either you're going to say it is the specifically characterized and the generalities, or again, another way of talking about them is to say it will be hidden or it will be obvious.
Notice.
Okay, so as we say, in terms of objects, we have two categories. So either you're going to say I have the specifically characterized and the generalities, or you're going to say I have the hidden and I have the obvious phenomena. So because we have two types of objects, we say we need to have two types of valid awareness that recognize each one of those objects. So, for example, for the obvious phenomena, such as the vase and the pillar and things like this, you understand that what you need to have is a type of valid awareness that directly sees them, directly understands them. And this is one type of valid awareness, the direct valid awareness. But then we have the other types of objects that are the hidden. So we cannot directly see them. So obviously we're going to have to rely on a different type of awareness. Now, to give you an example of that, the example is we are sitting right here, and then in the mountain, up at the top of the mountain, far away, we wonder whether there is fire there or not. With our eyes, we cannot see because it is far away. We don't have binoculars. We cannot directly see. However, if we observe that there is smoke coming out from the top of the mountain, by seeing the smoke, we can infer, meaning we can understand that there is fire. Although we do not directly see the fire, by reason of smoke, we infer, so we make a correct guess, we understand correctly that there is fire up there. So because we have two objects, we have two types of valid awareness. One is the direct valid awareness, and the other one is valid awareness of inference. Okay, so as we say, we have two types of valid awareness. One is called inference, the other one is called direct valid awareness. Now, what we translate in English as inference in Tibetan is two words, and the two words translate as subsequent understanding. Okay, so this term, subsequent understanding, really explains how the process of things, because you're dealing with a hidden phenomenon that you cannot directly perceive. It means, first of all, you have to give a cause, you have to give a reason. So first you give the reason, and after the reason, subsequently, to having processed the reason, you come to understand that there is such and such a thing is happening. So it is some subsequent understanding. Whilst in the case of direct valid awareness, there is no time lapse. Like you see the object and immediately you understand it, right? There's that immediacy with direct valid awareness. However, with inference, we must have first a correct reason, and the correct reason must be a correct sign. There are many types of signs, some are correct, some are incorrect. And actually, we have a whole area of study that is science and reasoning. We're not going to go into that today because, it's not much use into this class right now.
Yes.
Okay, so here we're talking about an object. The object is a hidden object, hidden phenomena, and it is something which is realized by relying on correct reason or by relying on correct sign. So realized through relying on correct reason refers to the object. whilst the mind that realizes it by relying on the correct reason is the mind of inference. There are many examples of inference that we can give here, such as, for example, inference, understanding that sound is impermanence, that the person is selfless, or that there is a fire up in the mountain by seeing the smoke. Although many times we say sound is impermanent, or the selflessness of the person and so forth, that doesn't mean that we have realized those things, because in order to realize them, you need to rely upon many reasoning. So you have to give a lot of reason, you have to sit down, you have to think the reason, and through relying on the reasoning, eventually you develop the realization. So having given you this explanation, I think it's very straightforward. If someone says, okay, what's the difference between hidden and obvious objects? You can say, okay, it's easy. Hidden is something that in order to understand it, in order to realize it, I must rely upon reason, I must rely upon sign. Whereas the obvious is something that I can understand without relying on any such reason or sign. Okay, so if we want to give the definition of the hidden object is that which is realized by relying on a correct reason. Okay, correct sign or correct reason. Examples are sound is impermanent, or the selflessness of the person, or the fire up in the mountain pass understood through smoke. Okay, so we said that the definition of the hidden object is that which is realized by relying on a correct sign, a correct reason. And then we gave as an example, sound is impermanent. Okay, so how are we going to, obviously, to understand that sound is impermanent, we need to rely on a correct sign. We need to rely on a reason. So how would we express this? We would say, take sound, it is impermanent because it is a product. So the last part where it says because it is a product is the one that gives you the reason. It gives you the correct sign. So here, by reason of being a product, we understand that it is impermanent. Okay, so Geshe, as has already mentioned, there is quite a lot to understand about what is a correct sign. And this is the area of study that is called Tsering, so logic and science and logic, but we are not going to go into that. It's beyond the scope of this class. Okay, so, and I think we understand now what is hidden phenomenon, but Geshe was saying another way of explaining what a hidden phenomena is. Hidden phenomena is something that an ordinary person, so here when we talk about ordinary person, it's not a Buddha, it's not an Arya being. So leave aside, put aside the Buddhas and the Arya beings. So we're talking about ordinary people here. So hidden phenomena is something that an ordinary person absolutely needs to rely upon reason in order to understand it. Otherwise, they would not understand it. And the obvious is that which an ordinary person does not absolutely need to rely upon reason in order to understand it. So, to give you an example of a hidden phenomenon that we understand through reason, right, we can say, someone can say, oh, I understand that Dorji Tashi is in his room. Why? Because I see his shoes. He has left his shoes outside the door. That's a reason, correct reason, that makes us understand that Dorji Tashi is inside.
Yes.
Okay, so we are outside the room. We cannot see Dorji Tashi inside the room. But we need a reason that is a correct reason that undoubtedly will prove that Doji Tashi is inside that room. What would you say? Okay, would you say it's correct reason if you say, oh, Doji Tashi is inside because earlier when I went there, I saw him inside earlier. Is this correct reason?
Because Doji Tashi could have left when you didn't see him.
It's quite possible he left through the back door, isn't it? Okay, we need a reason to understand, to prove, to understand that Doji Tashi is indoors.
If we hear his voice, if we hear his voice coming out from the room, then, or maybe not, because he can play radio.
Yes, you could say, I understand, I know that Doji Tashi is inside the house because I can hear his voice. And if Doji Tashi was not in the room, I wouldn't be able to hear his voice. So he must be in the room. But what about the devious Doji Tashi? He has made a recording of his voice. Not there, but we can hear the recording. Okay, so now the question is the recording of the voice of Doji Tashi, is it the voice of Doji Tashi? So the real voice, the actual voice, the speech of Doji Tashi is something which is produced from his larynx, from his tongue, from his palate, from the mouth, isn't it? This is the real voice. Whilst the recording is something which is produced by a machine. If you have the type of ears that can actually discern and say, no, this is the real voice, this is the voice produced from the larynx of Doji Tashi, then you could say this is correct reason. By relying on this reason, you prove that Doji Tashi is inside the house. So as you can see, there are many reasons that are near or close to be correct reasons, but they are not actually correct reasons. And because this is the case, it is easy to be mistaken, to be fooled, and so forth. Okay, the other example that we gave is the correct reason of the smoke. And we say by seeing the smoke, we can infer that there is a fire up in the mountain, all right? So the reason why we say this is because actually smoke is the result of something that is produced out of fire. So what about if we use another product that comes from fire, such as, for example, coal. So coal is after you have burned the wood log, right? You are left with the coal. So could you say, by seeing the coal, I infer that there is fire? Is this correct reason? Okay, so it's not every case of the result actually proving to us that the cause is there, because we see that the smoke that is a result can actually establish that there is fire, but the coal, which is also a result, does not establish the existence or does not prove the existence of the fire. So what is the difference here? One result establishes it, the other result does not. Okay, so let's look, going back into this difference between the smoke and the coal. The thing is that the smoke is a result that is very close to the cause. As soon as you lit a fire, immediately you will see the smoke rising. And the closer the result is to the cause, the easier it is to become a reason, a sign that proves to us the existence of the cause. The more the result is further away from the cause, as in the case of coal, the more difficult it is to establish, to prove that the cause of the fire is there. So the same thing now, think about the two examples, the voice of Tashi and the recording of the voice of Tashi. We had similar difference. The recording of Tashi's voice is a result that has come out of Tashi, but the direct voice that comes out of Tashi is a more immediate, a more close result. And therefore, the actual voice of Tashi is the one that becomes correct reason, that proves his presence. Once the recording does not really prove his presence. And this is why we say, by seeing the smoke rising, we infer the existence of a fire up in the mountain pass. Nobody says, by seeing the existence of the coal, we infer the existence of fire up in the mountain pass. All right. So you can see one is a very close, a very direct result that becomes reason, that establishes the existence of the cause. The other one is further, it has bigger distance, and therefore it does not really prove it. So the other thing in this example of the smoke, right? The thing is that from our room, we cannot actually see the fire up in the mountain. However, we can see the smoke. Smoke is something that we can perceive with our own eyes. So immediately that says to us, that communicates to us that there's a fire up there. And this is why we use it as a correct reasoning. Whilst the case with the coal, right? From where we are in our room, we cannot see the coal. The same way that we cannot see the fire, we cannot see the coal. And actually the coal is something that you would have, wherever is the area where the fire is burning, after the fire has died down, underneath you would get the coal. So we don't see the fire in the same way we don't see the coal. So why are we going to use the coal? Although it is a result that comes out of the fire, why are we going to use that? To prove the existence of the fire? It doesn't really prove it. Whilst the smoke is a close result, so a very near, intimate result. As soon as you have fire, what does fire become? What is the result of fire? It is smoke, right? So there's that proximity that makes us. So we can do this experiment with a candle, right? Or a butter lamp. Okay, you lit the fire, you lit the wick, and as soon as you have fire, if you put your hand above it, after a while you would see, or a piece of paper or something, you would see that this surface here will become black. Why is it becoming black? Because immediately the nature of fire changes into the nature of smoke, and we have the smoke there. Okay, so Geshe says, okay, that thing we have explained, the hidden, and we say the hidden phenomena is something which is understood by relying on correct reason, correct sign. Do you understand this? Today we have understood what is the hidden. And Geshe says, I don't think we have a problem understanding the obvious. Obvious is all those things that are right here in front of us. I've got my pencil case, whatever your book, your notebook, whatever is right here. The obvious we can see. So today we learned two new things, the hidden and the obvious. So, as we have said here, all existing phenomena in this world, they belong or they fit in these two categories. Either they will be hidden phenomena or they will be obvious, manifest phenomena, isn't it? Okay, so things like emptiness, impermanence, subtle impermanence, how would you classify those? Right, we only have two categories. Where would you place them? Okay, so it's hidden. Okay, so if it is hidden, how are we going to understand them? We're going to need some reason, some sign, isn't it? Okay, so what does that mean about emptiness? How can we understand emptiness? We can only understand emptiness by reflecting on this reasoning, isn't it? Otherwise, do you think that if you go around the world looking for emptiness, do you think you're going to find it? I didn't say empty, said emptiness. So empty, the fact that your pocket is empty or your wallet is empty, that's not emptiness. Okay, so you know how often we talk about emptiness and we say it's profound emptiness is difficult to understand. And what that implies is that unless you sit down and you analyze the reasoning, unless you reflect the reasoning, you will not understand the meaning of emptiness. So what does that make emptiness? It makes it a hidden phenomenon. So Geshe was saying, if you can actually find the correct sign, the correct reason that proves emptiness, but in that, you have to understand why it is correct. Okay, so if you find the correct sign, the correct reason, then it's not difficult to understand emptiness. So we talked about inference in terms of valid awareness, and we say inference realizes its object by relying on correct reason, on correct reasoning. Correct sign, correct reasoning. Okay, so correct reasoning, again, is something that has to be proven. So a further investigation needs to take place in order to authenticate that this reasoning is indeed correct. Then you can rely on the correct reasoning and prove or understand the hidden phenomena. But as we said, this is another area of study. In Tibetan, it's called tarik, meaning logic reasoning or logical reasoning. And maybe in the future, there will be the opportunity to study that. Okay, so we have talked about the hidden, and then the other category is the obvious, the manifest. As we say, there are things we can directly see or hear or touch and so forth. And the example here that is given is the vase. Okay, so Geshe says, I want you to be open-minded here. Sometimes in the monastery, it happened in debate. So we would come down in debate, and there would be some people who would just almost be afraid to give another example. So they say, no, I'm only going to say the vase as an example because our teacher said the example of the obvious is the vase. There are many things that are obvious, such as the pillar, the vase, all those things that we see. Okay, so Geshe says, I hope you're not going to become so narrow-minded. If I just mention one example, we just stick to the example. All right, okay, so very important, very good today. We came to understand the hidden and the obvious phenomena. Okay, so we say that all of those things are objects of knowledge. They are existent things. So we are going to give you here a list of terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms that they actually are equivalent. So we have established, base, existent, object of knowledge, assessed object, and phenomena, or sometimes we refer to them as dharma, phenomena. Okay, so all of those things, they are equivalent. So just as we say, the objects of knowledge are categorized in two, the specifically categorized and the generalities, or the hidden and the obvious. Similarly, objects are categorized into. Similarly, established bases are categorized into. Similarly, phenomena are categorized into. Yeah, they're just one and the same thing, but they're given different names. So here we're talking about the same thing, described with many different names. All of those names are equivalent. To give you another example, because this is common in Tibetan, we talk about the moon, right? Actually, in Tibetan, we have many words to describe the moon. One name is the moon. Another name is the one having cooling light. Another name is the one having white light. And yet another name is the one having a rabbit. Okay, so why is it called the one having cooling light? Well, it's because the light that comes out of the moon is this silvery cooling light in the evening. Why it is called the white light? Well, because, you know, the light that comes out of the moon is white. Why is it called the rabbit possessor, the one having a rabbit? Is because those who can see it, and some people, no matter how much they look, they cannot see it. But anyway, those who can see it, it's almost as if there is a drawing of the outline of a rabbit on the moon when we see it. So describing it from a different perspective, you can give it different names. So as we say, we have many different names, and actually each one of those names conveys something slightly different understanding, but they're all referring to the same thing. The first term that we have is established base. Each one of those terms has its own definitions. So the definition of that which, the definition of established base is that established by valid awareness. So because it is established by valid awareness, we end up talking about something which is an established base. And when we say it is established by valid awareness, it means it is realized by valid awareness. Because it is realized by valid awareness, it is established by valid awareness, and therefore it becomes an established base. Let's give an example. The vase. Why do we say that the vase is an established base? Because there is valid awareness that establishes it. There is valid awareness that realizes it. Okay, so what type of valid awareness is it? Is it direct valid awareness or is it inference? So we have to say there is valid awareness that establishes the vase, direct valid awareness that realizes the vase. Therefore, the vase becomes an established base. So you can see that why we use this term, we say it is an established base because there is some type of valid awareness that establishes it. And it establishes it by realizing it. So by realizing it, it establishes it. So it becomes an object that is established, in other words, realized by valid awareness. So this is why it's called an established base. Okay, let's look at the second term in our list, which is existent. The definition of existent is observed by valid awareness. So here we're describing the same thing. And if you want to give an example, you could give the same example, vase, right? But we're describing it from a different function. So here we're not saying what does this valid awareness establish, but rather we say, what is this valid awareness looking at? What is it focusing upon? Because it is focusing upon this vase, therefore the vase becomes its focal object. So this is the object that is observed by valid awareness. So valid awareness takes this as its focal object, it's looking at it, it realizes it, so it becomes the focal object, the observed object of this valid awareness. We come to the third term, and this is the object of knowledge. Its definition is suitable to be an object of the mind. Okay, so you see the two previous terms, they were, in their definition, they had valid awareness. But here in the definition, we don't have valid awareness, we have mind. Suitable to be an object of the mind. So if something becomes the object of the mind, can become, is suitable to be the object of the mind, that thing is an object of knowledge. What does it mean? It means that there is a mind that will, will engage that particular object and will realize that object. So again, the example, a vase. Why is the vase an object of knowledge? It is an object of knowledge because there is a mind that actually realizes it. So it becomes the object of a particular mind, and that mind realizes it. So you can see it's from the point of view of a different perspective, a different function, you could say. The next one in the list is assessed object. So what is the definition here? Realized by valid awareness. So because there is a valid awareness that realizes it, it means it assesses this object. It checks out this object, isn't it? That it understands, it realizes this object. So this becomes the assessed object of some type of valid awareness that realizes. Okay, the next term in our list is object. The definition of object is known by the mind. So when you say that there is a mind that knows it, it means there is a mind that realizes it. Okay, so it becomes the object of that mind who knows it, who comes to realize it. Okay, previously we had the definition realized by valid awareness. And then we said, okay, that's the definition of the assessed object. Here we're saying known by the mind. If you have that, that becomes the definition of the object. So it's just looking at the words or the function from just a different perspective. We come to the last word in our list, and this it's best translated as phenomena, not as dharma. Okay, so phenomena. So the definition of phenomenon is retaining its nature. Why? Because everything that exists, every phenomenon has its own nature. It retains this nature, and then it has we perceive an aspect of that particular nature. So the vase has its own nature, and we perceive that. The pillar has its own nature. This is what we perceive. So the phenomenon, let's say here, the vase, retains its identity, has its own identity. And this is true for all phenomena. So whether we talk about permanent phenomena or impermanent phenomena, all of them, they have their own identity. So it's not so helpful here to translate the term as dharma, because we use the term, oh, I practice dharma, oh, this is dharma, this is not dharma. And if you say this is dharma, it means this is virtuous activity. It doesn't include anything that it is non-virtue. But if you use the term phenomena, phenomena can include virtuous phenomena, non-virtuous phenomena, and so on and so forth, can include everything. Okay, so as you can see here, we talk about phenomena from the point of view of retaining their identity. We talk about objects from the point of view of becoming an object that is known by the mind. We talk about assessed objects from the point of view of being realized by valid awareness. We talk about objects of knowledge from the point of view of being suitable to be an object of the mind. We talk about existent from the point of view of being observed by valid awareness, and we talk about established basis from the point of view of being established by valid awareness. So it's just, as you can see, we are describing the same thing, but we're using different words because we are looking at it from a slightly different perspective. As we gave the example before with the moon, and we had different names for the moon. Here, you see, we have a few words. We have the word established, realized, assessed, known, becoming an object of mind or awareness and so forth. They are slightly different terms, but actually they talk about the same thing. Okay, so as you can see here, we have 6 terms. We have the established base, existent, object of knowledge, assessed object, object, and phenomenon. So each one of them has their own definition. All these 6 terms are equivalent. They're talking about the same thing. However, their definitions are given with using slightly different words. And therefore, if you understand the definition for each one of them, it means each definition gives you some extra understanding. You derive a little bit more taste, let's say, from each one of those definitions. If you come to understand this, you understand established bases, you understand objects of knowledge. It's a very good foundation to have. Okay, so remember, different definitions, but they are not referring to different things, refer to the same thing. Don't get confused. So Geshe says, I'm hoping you can learn those definitions and we can bring them into the class in the future. Hopefully it will be this way. Okay, we stop here for today.